Serious, what's the most creepy memory you have from when you were a kid? I remember when I was about 12 onward, I'd randomly wake up in the middle of the night to my abusive mother standing in the doorway. She had this look she would give when she was particularly messed up between the alcohol and opioids and sleeping pills she'd mix. It was absolutely satanic. On multiple occasions I would wake up to her just staring at me, but way longer than just to check on me. She would just stand there for what seemed like forever, and if I even slightly moved she'd scream at me for being awake and punish me. One day my dad called me out to the living room and my mother is there looking pretty concerned, telling him he was taking things too far. He tells me, "Your mom says you've been laying in bed crying at night because you're afraid someone's going to come in your room and kill you? What's that about?" I was totally confused and just blew it off as one of my mom's drunk high delusions and told him I absolutely didn't. It wasn't until I was an adult that I realized that whenever my mother said something about someone else, she was projecting. Like she told me for years that she suspected that my dad was cheating on her. She was actually cheating on him. Bitch was probably getting freaked up out of her mind and thinking about killing me in my own bed. No. We don't talk anymore, and I've informed her I will use whatever force necessary to remove her from my property if she ever gets it in her head to show up. I don't remember exactly how young I was at the time, but it was really young. At the time my parents both worked full-time and my very old grandmother lived with us and took care of me during the day. I was an only child at that time. We lived in flats. Throughout the day grandmother would take long baths and I'd be seated in front of the TV till she got out and played with me. This one time she took much longer than usual. At some point after calling out to her and getting no response, I went to the bathroom door and knocked. When she didn't come out, I went in. She was submerged to her chin. Her body was twisted. Her face was so contorted it looked like she was in agony. Her lips were completely skewed to one side of her face and her eyes were IDK. Just blank. I don't remember what happened next. But whenever my parents recounted the story, they say I ran out screaming bloody murder out of the flat. Neighbors heard me, called an ambulance and my parents. She had a stroke and would be bedridden for the rest of her life. She died a year or so later, I think. It's weird, I can't really remember what she looked like anymore, but her face that time stuck with me. Parents told me I didn't speak for weeks afterwards. Used to holiday in the Scottish Highlands. Friends of the family had a cottage there in the middle of nowhere. It was always creepy just because it was so isolated. Anyway, one day I went outside and heard the most unearthly sound I have ever experienced. It sounded like a robot demon cackling insanely while simultaneously crying in agony. It just sounded wrong. I went inside, white as a sheet, and told my dad. He grabbed a stick, LOL, said come on, and set off to find the source. We homed in on the sound and saw it was coming from the area close to the water tank which filled from the stream and supplied the cottage. There was clearly something not from this world stuck inside the tank. We nervously approached and circled the tank. My dad suddenly said, "Ah," and strides confidently to the tank. Now, I don't fully understand the setup of the water system, but there was some kind of small vent pipe on the tank. A large leaf had got stuck in the pipe and created a reed, like a woodwind instrument, and the tank was acting like a giant amplifier reverb chamber. The sound was channeled down the valley the stream was in and straight to the cottage. I can still hear the sound in my head as I type this, absolutely demonic. I still want to know how my dad thought he was going to tackle a slobbering hellbeast with a 3-foot stick. When I was in elementary school, probably 8 or 9, we were all on the playground. Probably like 100 kids throughout all the outdoor areas of the playground, teachers, etc. basketball court, jungle gym, random field areas, etc. middle of the day at recess. Bright and sunny and not a cloud in the sky. I was looking across the playground and all of a sudden there was one flash where everyone was running inside in unison, and then almost immediately, another flash where everybody was freaking gone, not a single other soul on the playground, and the sky was suddenly very dark and cloudy and stormy, and at the second flash, there was an extremely loud crack of thunder that rumbled and echoed for what seemed like minutes. It was clearly later in the day and I was so freaking confused. I made my way back to the classroom and it was probably 5 minutes before the final dismissal bell rang. The teacher was asking me where had I been? And I got in trouble. I'm guessing I fell asleep or something, but holy shit man. I've never experienced anything like that before or since. I've lived in a small mountain town in Colorado for 17 years. When my friends and I got our licenses, we'd drive around in the mountains when we got bored. This one area we went to frequently is beautiful, but it's known to be pretty sketchy. People shoot guns in the wrong areas, there's a lot of drug use when people party, and bodies have been occasionally found back there. We were driving around one night when we suddenly passed a man walking on the road. It was weird because we hadn't seen him in the headlights initially, it was more like he appeared out of nowhere as we were passing him. I thought he was walking a little weird as I looked back at him, so I asked my friend to stop, maybe he was hurt or something. He paused for like 10 seconds when we stopped, and then he started running at the vehicle. Not a "oh shit let me catch up to them real quick" jog with a wave or anything like that, a full-blown sprint like he had a personal vendetta against us. It freaked us out and my friend hit the gas again. We did call the police just to make sure we didn't leave him in danger, but didn't hear anything else about it. And this is more light-hearted, but when the game Until Dawn first came out, I was freshly living alone in my own place for the first time at 22. I was petrified of the dark for weeks after watching the playthrough. I had to start sleeping with a light on because I was having nightmares, and I was genuinely so terrified of the monsters in that game potentially busting in through my sliding door windows. I couldn't even bring myself to move around in my bed to adjust and get comfortable. I knew it was ridiculous but just couldn't shake that fear for weeks. I always had this early childhood memory of a time we went to visit some family in Florida. I don't know how old I was, but somewhere between 6 to 8 years old I think. I went on a walk around the block with my uncle, and he said something like, "Hey, my friend lives here, let's stop in and say hi for just a minute." The next memory I have, we are in the living room, the furniture, carpet etc. is all that very 80s brown, green, mustard earth tones, and it is dimly lit because the curtains are closed. I'm sitting on the couch being bored or something while my uncle talked to this guy, not paying attention until I could hear my uncle's voice getting louder. I hear his friend saying something like, "Come on man, I'll trade you an 8-ball for an hour with the kid." It stuck out in my mind because I knew what an 8-ball was in the context of the magic type, and didn't understand why this guy wanted to give one to my uncle. My uncle seemed mad and I didn't understand that either, and we left right after. I don't remember talking about it with my uncle, I think because I could tell he was mad and that confused and scared me. My uncle had a crack and cocaine problem that eventually gave him a heart attack and killed him when I was about 19, and it wasn't until then that the memory clicked into place and I realized what had actually almost happened to me. I have no idea why my uncle thought it was a good idea to bring a kid to a pickup, but I'm grateful he didn't pimp me out. Yikes! When I was about 9 or 10, there was a child abductor and murder that was in the local news. Both of my parents were local police officers. My dad was working on the case, I think. My parents talked about it a lot in passing. One thing they specifically talked about was the white van with a circular window on the side of the van. Well, during that time, I was in a knee brace due to recurrent knee dislocations. However, I was an active child, so I didn't let it keep me from going out anywhere. Well, one day I decided to go with my sisters and their friends to collect paper money for our paper route. Well, as we were walking, me limping, a white van with a circular window passed by our group. The first time we didn't think of it because we lived on a main road. After the third time seeing it, we all got a little scared. My sisters and their friends were saying how they can just make a run for it, they'll be fine. At that point, I started sobbing cause I knew I wouldn't get away cause of my knee. My sisters ended up walking me home and told me to lock the door, then they left me by myself. I remember spending the next couple hours avoiding windows and doors, in case the van saw where I lived. It was pretty terrifying as a child. When I think about it now, I wonder how much my sisters might have exaggerated what they saw in order to scare me, so they wouldn't have me tagging along. 2 stories from the same place we used to holiday every year, a tiny island, half a mile wide and a mile across, no cars allowed, and it used to be inhabited by monks, so there were many tales of hauntings. The first was when we used to stay on the campsite. I had been to the toilets and I was walking back to our tent. I passed through a small group of people sitting in chairs in the middle of the field. Nothing unusual here, people would sit out and stargaze and drink without bothering people inside their tents. As I passed through, someone said something to get my attention. I can't remember what was said, but I was just chatting with them when suddenly this one man pointed his finger at me. He had a cigarette in his hand and all of a sudden all I could focus on was the lit end of this cigarette. He kept on talking to me, but I don't know what he said. All I know is I could not take my eyes away from that glowing orange dot. I felt very afraid, but I could not move. It was like the whole world vanished and it was just me, him, and that damn cigarette that I could not stop looking at. I don't know what happened, but I'm damn sure that dude hypnotized me in an instant. I remember hearing a laugh from someone in the group and it was like the spell was broken. I ran back to my tent with my heart pounding as they all laughed at me. Overall, it is the weirdest thing that has happened to me. I don't really believe in psychics and hypnotism etc., but that guy sure did something to my brain. The other incident was when we stayed in a cottage overlooking a courtyard which had a church in the corner. It was the last thing I would see from outside when I closed the curtains at night, and it used to freak me out. It got to the stage I would crawl under the window to close the curtains without having to look outside at that creepy old church. A few years later, some archaeologists visited the island and did some digging. What did they find under the church steps? The skeleton of a monk, buried upside down. There was a garden next to a footpath that some kids used to ride over to take a shortcut. The path was narrow with thick thorn bushes each side, very secluded. One day I lost my balance and crashed into the garden on my BMX, was around 8 years old at the time, by accident. I got up, got back on my bike and went down the footpath. Halfway down, a man started coming towards me shouting with his arms stretched out blocking any way past. Behind him his wife came doing the same thing. They wouldn't let me go for 10 or so minutes. For the first 2 minutes they made me repeat my name over and over. Then they just stood there at my front and back while looking down on me for like ages. I could feel their breath on my face and neck. Suddenly the bloke snapped out of the glare and told me, "You better go now." As he stared at the floor, I rode out of there as fast as I could. They probably had enough of the local kids using their front garden as a cut-through. But they were freaking weird. Later on they put up a 7-foot fence all around their property. They moved shortly afterwards. When they left, their neighbors told us they never seemed right.